Hey guys, welcome back to the Fantasy Football Profits. It's time now. We got to project where these guys are going to go and what they're going to do. So we're looking forward to this 2019 free agency period. And really the question mark for this is, of course, for football, where are these guys going to go and what's their impact going to be? But more importantly, in fantasy, what's their fantasy impact going to be? I'm really excited to do a little prognosticating, a little projecting, and just throw our opinion out there. It's always fun to play the what if game, something that we don't get to do enough on this channel, especially because we love to just stick to the facts and really only tell you guys what we know is the truth. We can save some time at the beginning of this video because we don't really have any news to talk about. So I think we should just get started and talk about the first guy. What do you say, Rob?
Yeah, let's just get right into it. And once again, at the bottom, if you have any questions, thoughts, we want to hear who you think number one free agent out there, how you think these guys are going to produce, or where they're going to land. We'd love to hear your comments and thoughts on it. But let's just get to the first guy, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I forgot to mention, guys, if there's a specific player you want to hear about, we'll have links down in the description so you can skip to those times. Of course, we'd encourage you to watch the whole video, but we are going to insert that because some of these players are going to take very long to talk about, and if you're not interested in them, that's quite a while to listen to.
Okay. So let's start number one guy out there, Le'Veon Bell. The first three guys I'm going to talk about, Bell, Brown, and Hunt, are all first-round fantasy picks next season, really. Obviously, we'll have to see where they land, but ultimately, these guys all have that sort of talent. I think all three of these guys legitimately could be number one in fantasy scoring for their positions if the cards land right. I think these guys are very talented there. Now, it's really obvious to talk about Le'Veon Bell as being the number one coveted free agent in terms of fantasy football goes. As most you know, last year he held out the entire season. And I think he was looking for a long-term contract from Pittsburgh. Now, there is a chance that Pittsburgh could sign him this year and offer him a contract, but it seems very unlikely he's going to end up back in Pittsburgh. So this guy's going to end up somewhere else at this point. I think last year he hurt himself. He had a $14.5 million deal on there. He could have signed the franchise tag that would get him that money. He held out, and I think he assumed that the Steelers were going to struggle running the ball, and they have a hard time finding a viable replacement there. But he was dead wrong. James Conner and Jalen Samuels succeed in that offense. In fact, they were excellent. There's even some statistics earlier this year that broke down that I showed that offense was more productive with Conner in there versus Bell. Now, I think it's hard to make that comparison. They're apples and oranges. You got a different offensive coordinator, other factors there. But once again, I think he was wrong. I think he thought he'd hold out. They would struggle, and then they throw a lot of money at him, and that wasn't the case there. That offense was good. I don't know if you have any thoughts about how that offense was without him there, but...
Absolutely. Not so much on that offense. I think we all know how that offense was, but man, it seems like every year the running backs in the NFL, they're worth less and less and less, and this just seemed to be honestly probably the absolute worst time for Le'Veon Bell to have done that, and he really kind of hurt himself in that aspect. But I am curious to see, because we know some team's going to give him the money he wants. There are a lot of teams, as we talked about earlier today, that have way more salary cap than we were expecting when we started to do our research.
Yeah, you talk about dropping fantasy, or not dropping fantasy value, but I guess dropping value for running backs in the NFL. Here's another thing that's going to hurt his value, and that's C.J. Anderson. Now, how would C.J. Anderson hurt Le'Veon Bell? I'll tell you why it's going to hurt his value there. There's a lot of comparisons in the offseason how Le'Veon Bell wanted a big contract, very similar to the one that Todd Gurley got, right? That was the big thing. Todd Gurley gets his long-term deal. Bell wanted that. He doesn't get it there. Todd Gurley goes out this year, and he looks like he's going to be the MVP early in the season for fantasy football and maybe for the regular football also. And then he had some knee injuries, some knee issues there, so they brought in C.J. Anderson to fill in for him. Well, since then, Anderson has been great. He's actually outperformed Todd Gurley even in the playoffs there, showing once again, I think the trend in the NFL that running back success is tied to their system, quarterback play, and the offensive line. I think just a lot of owners and teams, especially cap-strapped teams, are realizing that they can spend that money elsewhere and bring in a cheaper running back option. So I think Anderson is actually going to hurt the whole argument about, well, hey, look at Todd Gurley had a big deal. Well, if you're a big deal at him, and now the Rams are realizing that C.J. Anderson is almost as productive there, don't get me wrong. When it's all said and done, Todd Gurley is a much, much better running back than C.J. Anderson. But once again, Anderson has been great there. We'll talk about him later. So with that said, though, you're right. Bell is going to get paid by some team, and he's going to become a bell cow out there for some team. And he's a great back. But I don't think he's going to get the contract that he envisioned last year. I don't know. But do you see anywhere getting $14 million next year from any team? I just don't see that.
Yeah.
So how good is he, and what will be his impact be next season? Well, we know he's good. We know Le'Veon Bell has been a good running back in the NFL for quite a while now. But you begin to look at some of his numbers, what you're going to find, what I'm going to share with you, he's actually been one of the best running backs in the history of the game. Let me get into that a little bit, and then we'll go to some speculation of where I think he's going to go, and you can share with me what you think there. So consider this. In his career, he's averaged 5.03 catches per game. That's better than Marshall Faulk or Larry Centers, who are 1 and 2 all-time in receptions for running backs. I mean, this guy's been phenomenal in the league. He's still young at 27. Now, he's got less wear and tear in that body because he held out last year, so I think that even bodes well. He's 27, but in reality, his body's about a 25 or 26-year-old there, so he's still young enough to be productive. In his career, he averages 129 total yards per game. You look at his passing yards, his rushing yards, you combine it, 129 total yards per game is what he's averaged in his career that he's played. That is better than greats like Marshall Faulk, LaDainian Tomlinson, Barry Sanders, and Jim Brown. In fact, he's number one all time. This guy has been crushing it, total yards per game. He has been so productive there. There are no deficiencies in his game, at least I don't think so. I think he's a true 3-down back. He can get goal line carries. He's using the passing game. This is a guy that can handle 7 to 8 catches per game, but easily 25 to 30 carries per game because of his body size. Now, he does have a career 4.3 yards per carry, which is not spectacular per se. But I think if you look at the numbers, here's what you know. Okay, his rookie year, he struggled. His yards per carry is 3.6. And then last year that he played, his yards per carry are 4.0. But some of that was the fact that he missed the preseason. He was rusty. First 2 games in the league, his yards per carry are 3.2. So it took him a while to really kind of hit that groove. You take away his rookie season that year, his yards per carry in the other season were 4.9, 4.7, and 4.9. He's got 42 TDs in 62 games. His touchdown per game average projects out to be 10.8 over 16 games. So this guy gets the end zone. This guy can do it all. Do you see any deficiencies in his game? I mean, when you look at that, how do you feel about him overall as a player?
In his game, no. I mean, clearly there's some deficiencies as far as he wants a big contract. He's maybe a little bit selfish, whatever. But as far as his play, he can do everything. There's never been a knock on him and how he plays. I guess maybe stylistically he's a patient runner. I guess if you want more of a north-south guy, then that might be a reason to not go after Bell. But no, I don't see any problem with the way he plays.
Yeah, he might be better fit in certain blocking schemes, maybe zone blocking, things like that. But yeah, he definitely has all the skill. Now, I think early on he said he wanted to be with the Colts. He kind of verbalized that he wanted to play for the Colts. I get that. You got Andrew Luck, T.Y. Hilton there playing indoors. But right now, Max is doing well on that team, and there hasn't been a lot of response right now when he was from the Colts to indicate that they're going to go after him, and so that doesn't seem to be the case. And then 3 days ago, rumors started to surface that he wants to sign with the Dolphins. One, he enjoys being in Miami. He actually spends his off seasons there. He parties a lot there, although that actually might be bad for him to end up in a place where he's known for partying. If you look at his style of his play, a good fit for offensive scheme, cap space, intangibles, depth position, team needs, things like that. Here's what I'll tell you what my take on this. He wants to go to Miami. I love Drake. For whatever reason, the coach didn't commit to use him, so maybe they would go after him. The problem with this, Miami is only going to have $14 million above the cap. They don't have a lot of money. They got other needs they need to address. So much he wants to be there. I just don't see him going to Miami, but he could. He could land there, but at this point, I would say probably not, unless he's willing to take a major hit in his what he's going to sign for. So you got Buffalo. And now Buffalo, I think, would be a great fit. They're rebuilding there. They've got LaShawn McCoy next year. You had some interesting stats you were sharing about the Bills' running game last season. So you want to share that real quickly?
Yeah, the Bills' running game was absolutely awful last year. Not only did McCoy average 3.2 yards per carry, Chris Ivory averaged 3.3 yards per carry. They were awful. In fact, the best running back on that team, or the best rusher on that team, was their quarterback, Josh Allen. Josh Allen had the most yards, the best yards per carry, the longest run, and the most touchdowns. In fact, of the top 4 rushers on that team, 3 of them combined for just 4 touchdowns. But by himself, Josh Allen combined for 8. I mean, it was ugly how well he was or how effective he was compared to the rest of the guys there. It's just bad.
Yeah, so I think Buffalo would be a great fit. I'm not saying I think he's going to go there, but they're a team that based on money, opportunity would work there. Another team, though, and this is probably the number 1 team right now, a front runner to sign him, that's the New York Jets. Initially, he kind of balked at the idea, but it sounds like he's warmed up now. They're not going to have Crowell back. The team's got a lot of money they could throw at him. I think they're number 2 right now in the NFL, didn't you say, as far as where they're at money cap-wise?
Yeah, I believe so.
And I think it's somewhere like 95 or 100 million, so they've got the money there. And he's also warmed up to the idea of being the number 1 guy there in that offense, supporting a second-year back, Sam Darnold, who, as the year went on, got better. Oakland, I think he'd be a great fit in Oakland there. They could use a guy like him there. With that said, though, I think John Gruden is really trying to build this team from the ground up. I'm not sure. You look at how he dumped so many players, getting draft picks in. I guess I don't see them aggressively going after him there. One team that's surprising, though, that's made a lot of news, have actually indicated that they'd be interested in him, and that's Philadelphia Eagles. Coach came out and said that they need to improve that offense, in particular their running game there. The problem with that is they have major cap issues. They are the worst team in the NFL right now, 32nd. They are negative $16 million cap hit going into next year. Now, once again, General Manager Howie Roseman came out and talked about needing to improve in that area. and how they love bringing in a back like Bell, but they have cap issues. And you actually heard something interesting that maybe you could share regarding that.
Yeah, there was actually a lot of news coming around, kind of floating around the atmosphere, that they might work out some sort of trade for Leonard Fournette to get rid of Nick Foles. I'll talk about that a little bit later when I talk about Nick Foles, but that is interesting, especially when you look back at some of the running backs they've had. Bell is different than most running backs they have. They have very physical north-south between the tackle runners. Of course, we saw Blunt and Ajayi. I wouldn't be surprised if they stuck with a guy more like that this free agency.
The one thing I'll give the Eagles credit for, they're not afraid to be aggressive. You know, they went over Ajayi, they wanted to bolster that running game. They won the Super Bowl. They went after Golden Tate last year at the trade deadline. So it wouldn't surprise me if they made a bold move, whether it be signing Bell or making a trade, but we'll get to that later. Washington, the Redskins could use a running back there. Reports Alex Smith is not going to be back next year. They need some help in that game. You look at Chris Thompson's a good back, but he's not a three-down back by any stretch. But I think you probably talk about Washington a little bit when you get to Adrian Peterson, right?
Yeah, I will.
So I'm not going to get to that. Tampa Bay is a sleeper team for me. I think he'd be a great fit there. It's warm weather. He likes to be in Florida. They've got good weapons around him, and they don't have a really good back. The only problem is they have cap issues also. They don't have a lot of money available. San Francisco. Now, I don't think San Francisco is going to seriously consider him. They brought in McKinnon and they got Breda there, but I think they should consider him, and I'll tell you why. McKinnon and Breda, we've always said that in the videos. We had talked about it on our site for a couple years. These guys are smaller backs that just simply can't handle that wear and tear in the NFL like a guy who's much bigger, Bell, could. I don't think they're considering him, but I think Shanahan should consider him there, especially in that offense. Some other guys, teams to consider, I think that would be good fits, but are unlikely. Chicago Bears. We'll talk about them later on also. We'll talk about Kareem Hunt, some other things. But right now they need a dual threat back. They've got two backs. They got Cohen and they've got Howard, but they both have deficiencies in their game. Tariq Coleman is very athletic, very fast, but he's small at about 185. He can't handle 20, 25 carries a game by any stretch. And Howard is just not effective in Nagy's passing game there. And they've actually been testing the waters, talking about bringing Hunt in, so I think they're looking at somebody there. Anything you want to add on the Chicago situation there?
No, nothing on the Chicago situation. I would be curious to see him go to San Francisco for sure, just because of that fit. They love to use running backs to receive out of the backfield. That'd be interesting. But with all the deficiencies they have on defense, I just don't think they'll make it work.
Yeah, and they're also looking at actually bringing in Antonio Brown, San Francisco, but we'll talk about that later. Kansas City would be a perfect fit for him there, and they've got money, but Damian Williams is cheaper, and he's been doing really well there, and they've already signed him to a 2-year deal, so I don't think that's going to be the case. Detroit would be a nice fit, but I love Kerryon Johnson, and I think that he's going to be their guy. Baltimore could use it, but you got Gus Edwards, you got Dixon there. Houston definitely would have been, at the beginning of this year, I thought Houston would be the team that would take a serious look at him, but Lamar Miller has rebounded a little bit. Tennessee. I know Derrick Henry had some good games, but if you look at before, the first 13 weeks in the season, he was not a good back, and he's a one-trick pony. Guy can't be used in the passing game at all. And then you've got Deion Lewis, who's very good in the passing game, but he's not a big back. I think he'd be a good fit. Right now, the number one team would appear to be the New York Jets, but we'll see. His fantasy outlook. Going into next year, I think I see with him a small statistical regression compared to what he did in Pittsburgh. Well, in Pittsburgh was just a perfect situation for him there. It's really hard to duplicate that. He's going to go to a new team and have to learn a new playbook. Now, will that offense be as friendly towards him as it was in Pittsburgh in terms of touches? Now, I'd imagine that whatever team signs him will make him the focal point of their offense, right? That would be common sense. But he's going to have to work off some rust after taking a year off. And here's the biggest thing. Whatever team he goes to, I don't think he's going to have as much talent as a supporting cast. He played with Juju Smith-Schuster, Antonio Brown, Emmanuel Sanders, Ben Roethlisberger. Whatever team he goes to, there's only a few teams in the NFL that have that sort of talent. So another team he's going to go to is not going to have quite as much talent, and defense will be able to focus on him and load the box. So I think that's going to make it difficult. So I see what I would call a statistical regression, but very minor. Wherever he goes, all things considered, this guy's a great back, and he'll be a solid first-round fantasy pick no matter where he lands. So,
all right, that sounds great. All right, so why not talk about, honestly, probably the only big-name quarterback that we're going to discuss as far as this free agency goes, and we'll get this out of the way, Nick Foles. Now, first thing we got to talk about is it's looking like he's probably a 95% chance that he's going to be an NFL free agent, but there is a chance that he isn't. The Eagles could sign him to a $20 million option by February 20th is the deadline. They have to do that. You talked about their cap space issues. That's not going to happen unless there's a trade to work out. So I do want to talk about there's one possible way this might happen, and that's that the Eagles sign him for that $20 million option that they have, and then they trade him to the Jaguars, and that's what we talked about earlier. Jaguars are wanting to get rid of Leonard Fournette, and you know what? Eagles need a running back, so this might be a sort of trade that could work out perfectly. The Jaguars have a 7th overall pick in the draft this year, which works out very well, as Nick Foles is a guy who is absolutely worth a first rounder. We talk about how valuable the quarterback position is and how much need the Jaguars are in. They could give up their pick and they could give up Leonard Fournette for Nick Foles. This is something that they've been talking that they really want to do, guys. They just voided $7.1 million of his contract. They've complained about him. They are very adamant that they do not want him on his roster, and I think that he'd be a fairly good fit playing for the Eagles. There are some concerns, however, like I talked about a minute ago when you're talking about Bell. The Eagles love those between the tackles north-south runners like Blunt and like Ajayi that they have gone for in the past, and if they don't go after Kareem Hunt, if they don't get a Le'Veon Bell, because of that cap space, maybe they could go out there and get a Fournette who's a little bit cheaper. Although that's what I thought, and then it turns out he is a top 10 salary at the running back position over the next 2 years. So he's certainly cheaper than them, but not by much. And of course, they would just like to get something from Nick Foles. Nick Foles is a good quarterback, and getting some draft picks would be huge. And so that would, of course, bode very well. That is probably the biggest incentive for them is it's just letting a guy walk doesn't do them any good. That might happen. However, I don't necessarily think that will happen. I think it's a little bit more likely he becomes a free agent. And so some of those possible free agency moves that could happen, we'll talk about in a second. But Rob, I'm just because I haven't even ran this by you or talked this to you yet until this very second. How does that sound to you? Does that sound like a crazy trade or what?
Yeah, it does. I mentioned the previous guy, I would say that's not true. It sounds like a lot of talk's not going to happen. But once again, the Eagles have been an aggressive team, unlike other teams. I love the aggressiveness that they have, especially if they have a Super Bowl. Us Vikings fans don't have that. So normally I would say that's not going to happen. But in this case, it certainly could be a reality there. I do have concerns about being Leonard Fournette. I know you want to improve your running game, but his yards per carry have been lower. Maybe that's the offense he played on. You save a little bit of money, but not a lot of money. And he seems like he has some character issues. So is that really the route they want to go? Going to Nick Foles, I like Nick Foles. He's going to sign somewhere he needs to. I'm excited to see what the guy can do. He's been confusing. It's not just his stretch he had last year. And even a little bit this year, made people call him the Magic Man. If you go all the way back, he had a year there where he had a phenomenal season. We had 27 touchdown passes to only 2 interceptions. He was phenomenal. So the guy has shown he can be successful. Now, where he lands would be a viable option. Is he a guy that you would consider? Obviously, you don't know because we don't know where he's going to go. But Nick Foles would be a viable fantasy option. And where would you have him prematurely ranked right now?
Right now I'd probably put him in that 16 to 24 range. I'm projecting when you look at some of the teams that he could possibly go to, maybe the Redskins or the Bengals or the Broncos, he doesn't have great options. And quite honestly, there's a reason that a lot of teams haven't stuck with him as their starting quarterback. He did have that fantastic season, and then sure enough, they didn't want to roll with him going forward as their starting quarterback, and it made moves, and he shifted around and played for all these different teams. And I always like to say there must be something they're seeing that we can't. And so there is that small aspect to it. He's a good quarterback, and he absolutely deserves to be a starting quarterback. But are you honestly going to draft him earlier in a draft and say that you can trust him as your fantasy option? No. If you follow our philosophy, you're going to take maybe a chance on him late, toss him on your bench, watch and see. Of course, there's always quarterbacks every season that break out and surprise us. Pat Mahomes was unbelievable this year. Last year, for the first half of the season, Deshaun Watson did it. And so there's very well an opportunity, but that is more of a gamble that you're going to have to take. You can't trust him, honestly, no matter where he goes, especially looking at the options. So let's talk about some of those options. First option that I heard was a lot of reports that the Washington Redskins might go after him. That is based off of the reports that because of his injury, Alex Smith may not play in the 2019 season. For one, he very well could, and that would entirely take this option off of the table. And for two, I don't think that they're going to go after him, even if he doesn't play. If you're the Washington Redskins, I think you have to be honest, and this is a tough pill to swallow, but you have to say, we're not Super Bowl contenders right now. We need to build up our franchise, maybe not entirely restart, maybe not do what John Gruden did, but we just have to build for the future and get some weapons around us. Even if Alex Smith doesn't play, why are you trying to make moves? Maybe you just keep your draft picks and start building for the future. Top of that, he is on a pretty long-term, very expensive contract right now, and so you're not going to bring in another quarterback if 2 years from now Alex Smith is going to be back. I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me.
Another thing I think about too, and you may even have it in your notes there. So, but typically speaking, teams don't like to trade within their division. They just don't. So would even the Philadelphia want to trade to Washington within their division? That's not typically what teams will do. So.
Yeah, and that is if they opt to take the $20 million contract, which would be far too risky to do with Washington. Again, this is if he hits the free agent market that they might want to sign him. They do have only 5 draft picks. They have the 15th overall pick. I would be very curious to see if they went after some quarterbacks. There are a few guys in this, but again, they have so many issues right now. That offensive line is bad. The receiving core ain't great. The running back situation, we'll see how that develops. That's, I think, maybe fine for now. But the defense has issues. They have so much going on that while you've got a quarterback, even if he misses a season, I don't see them going after another quarterback right now, unless possibly they take a 2nd or 3rd round quarterback who's young to groom and develop. Another option was the Bengals, and at first I thought that this was perfect. I thought that this was, okay, this is going to happen. This looks like a great option. And then as I started to look deeper and deeper into this, I just realized I don't think this is going to happen. First off, they have the 11th overall pick. That means they're in a prime spot to get a guy like Dwayne Haskins or Kyler Murray. If they're saying, we want a quarterback, they're going to go after a younger guy. I think that's really it. Nick Foles isn't old, but at 30 years old, it's hard to say, wow, he's got so many years of development in front of him. And so that's very well going to happen. And then on top of that, this has to be a little bit disheartening as a Bengals fan, unfortunately for you guys. They have come out and said that Andy Dalton has many years left with the Bengals, and he will be the starter in 2019. So that I feel like we should just have a moment of silence for Bengals fans. That's really unfortunate, but it's true. They have a lot of issues, as we've talked about with other teams. Offensive line, defense, wide.
Defense is atrocious.
That was one of I want to say historically bad defense. I don't know how bad they were, but it was awful. And so they're not going to focus on a quarterback. And then finally, the last option was the Broncos. And another situation where it's like the Broncos need to go after a quarterback. And you know what John Elway said he's the short-term fix, and we're going to stick with him for now. That's kind of what he came out and said. That's not a quote, but that is
Case Keenum regarding Case.
Regarding Case Keenum, as well as they have the 10th overall pick. Quarterbacks they talked about targeting. There's some news that they might go after Kyler Murray, 10th overall, or they might wait till later in the draft and try to groom Drew Lock under Case Keenum, as well as Joe Flacco and Ryan Tannehill being some guys who could possibly land on their team as free agents or as guys in this offseason. And so honestly, Nick Foles is completely up in the air. I started this thinking, there's plenty of teams that will know where he's going to go, and then I sat back and realized we have no idea where this guy's going to land. I'm just kind of excited to sit back and watch and see.
All right. So Antonio Brown, why is Antonio Brown here? He's not a free agent. Here's why. This guy's on the move. There's a 95% chance he's going to change teams. In fact, Steelers brass has come out and said it's hard to imagine a situation where he stays with the team. He's cut off all communication from officials. Him and Ben Roethlisberger's have a rift, and I think that bridge appears to be burnt there. So how good is he and what is his fantasy outlook going into next year? And then we'll speculate where he could land, whatnot. First of all, I want to say this regarding his fantasy outlook. I know a lot of people are concerned about divas. One, I don't like divas. And wide receivers, for whatever reason, they seem to be more diva-ish, if that's even a word, more diva-ish than other positions in the NFL, right? Yeah, he's got some attitude that I think he needs to work out, but I don't think it's that bad. I think it's going to affect it, but I think he can go on to another team and be successful. Part of the reason why I think that is, yes, he's had some attitudes. I don't like the way he's handled some situations, but there are other reports now coming out that Ben Roethlisberger is almost just as much of a diva, and he's contributed to that. There's some things that he's done actively and publicly in the team that's really undermined Antonio Brown and provoked him a little bit there. So I think here's a guy that can go to another team in the right situation. He'll be a team player. He's obviously very talented. Before I get into some stats, any comments you want to make regarding that situation? Is he too much of a diva? Do you hands off this guy or what?
Well, first thing we have to talk about statistically, he has been the best wide receiver in the NFL since he's come in and really taken over that role. So there's no arguing with his talent. And really, he's the same guy he's always been. He's had the same attitude. We're just now hearing about it. So I don't think that should affect it. And then really, when you look at it, the wide receiver position is full of divas. If a quarterback has these attitude issues, it's a major concern for me. But we've seen plenty of wide receivers with this sort of attitude just continue to play and have great careers in the NFL. Yeah. Odell Beckham has been doing it. Randy Moss did it for quite a while. Like, it doesn't concern me.
Terrell Owens, you've got Dez Bryant, you name it. It's all over.
You name it. It just doesn't concern me that much at this position. Okay. So I'm not worried about it.
So you talked about the fact that he's been one of the best since he's come in the league, but I would say he had a 6-year stretch there that would be better than any 6-year stretch that any wide receiver has ever had in the NFL. Consider this during a 6-year stretch, the last 6 years, right? He's had 6 consecutive seasons with over 100 catches per season. Jerry Rice only did it 4 times his entire career. I mean, that's phenomenal. During that same stretch, every year he's had over 1,000 yards receiving. He's had 7 total 1,000 yards receiving in his career. He did miss it 1 year, 2012. He missed 3 games due to an injury. If he played, he probably would have hit that number there. 67 touchdowns during that stretch. In 2015, he had a season for the ages. 136 catches and 1,834 receiving yards. That's a phenomenal year there. In fact, if you look at it, the most receptions per season record, he's got number 2 and number 3, one season 139 and 129. Number 1 record of all time is Marvin Harrison, 143. So this guy's been phenomenal. Now, we can talk about the numbers. If you look at the numbers, you wonder, like, maybe this guy should have been number 1 free agent in terms of, or the guy that we're going to discuss who's changing teams over Le'Veon Bell. But so why do we have Brown here? Age, 31 versus 27. That's the difference. Brown versus Bell there. He's a little bit older. How do I expect he's going to do next year? Well, I would also expect a slight statistical regression wherever he ends up landing. It's hard to imagine an offense where we're going to see the same amount of targets and workload that he had in Pittsburgh with Ben Roethlisberger. Once again, that is just a perfect situation for him. The other thing I think is a bit of a concern is 31. He's not old for a wide receiver, but he's definitely not young anymore. And so I think you're going to begin to see a little bit of a statistical decline there.
Yeah, absolutely. When you really start to get that age, it's not the age where you're concerned about his production, but you know 2 things. 1, a team that's picking him is not in a rebuilding mode, and 2, team he wants to go to is not in a rebuilding mode. And so I think as we look towards teams that he could go to, it's probably going to be towards more competitive options.
Yeah. Teams that have been out now, currently, here is the rumors out there in terms of where they think he's going to land. San Francisco, he shared that he wants to go there. George Kittle's reached out to him. What a great combination that would be, right? Love George Kittle. That's a whole other conversation to have. But if he does go to San Francisco, think of Coach Shanahan. And I think back to Julio Jones in the year that he had under Shanahan. He had a season for the ages there. And so obviously this is a guy, it's not just him. If you all take a look at it, Garcon had some really big numbers with him as his head coach there. And so if he ends up in San Francisco, he's going to be great there. Some other teams look at him as the Colts, the Jets, and the Raiders. I'm thinking the Raiders could have just kept Amari Cooper, huh?
Right.
That's another conversation. Anyways, obviously he lands for Indianapolis. If he were to go there, I like that fit a lot. They have the money. They've got the most money in the NFL. If you put him on that team with Hilton and Luck, man, I tell you what, that is a great thing there. So, but as of right now, it's going to come down to, I would say, San Francisco is the front-running team to get him. Now, here's the trick. He's not technically a free agent, so he has to get traded, and I think it's going to require a first-round draft pick. And so for us to figure this out, that's what it really comes down to, is what teams are going to give that up for him. I think he's going to change teams. No matter where he lands next year, he's going to be a top 10 wide receiver and most likely in the top 5. That's where I take it. This guy's just very, very good. He loves to win. He's competitive. Once again, there's no deficiencies in his games in terms of being a wide receiver there. So anything you want to add to that?
No, that sounds good to me. I mean, this is pretty straightforward as far as he's just great.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Mark Ingram. Now, I'm very interested in Mark Ingram. First thing coming out of this, we got to talk about the fact that Mark Ingram wants to actually stay in New Orleans. He has stated that's where his family's at. That's where they've been for a while. His kids go to school there. It's where he's married. Like, that's where he wants to be. He said that he wants to be in New Orleans and he wants to win a Super Bowl with the Saints. And so first thing we got to talk about, and I don't want to spend too much time on it because it's a boring conversation. What are the odds that he stays with the Saints? And I'm actually going to say they're pretty good. Now, the Saints don't have a massive cap space, but if he was willing to take a bit of a pay cut, and not get all the money that he could definitely stay there in that role. And unlike some other guys in this free agent class, especially at the running back position, he wants to stay there. He hasn't made this thing where he wants to be the guy and he's really maybe, he wants to have this huge contract and be the sole running back. Like, I guess he's comfortable where he's at in life. He wants to stay there. I think it's very well possible, but he will have to take a pay cut. And so it is a very realistic option, and maybe even more likely that he does leave. So some of the teams that he could leave to would be the Jets, the Texans, and the Bills. Those are the 3 teams that I'm going to talk about briefly. Now, as we go forward to projecting his fantasy value, what did he do last year? Well, with the 4-game suspension, he had 645 yards and 6 touchdowns. Despite that suspension, that is still a bit of a drop-off in his statistics. That's on pace for 850 yards and 8 touchdowns. It's clear that the Saints are moving to Alvin Kamara as their guy, or honestly, they already have. However, if you're the Saints, you do want to keep both these running backs if you can manage it. The question is, of course, how realistic is it? And so what would he look like on some of these other teams? Well, for the Jets, that looks like a great fit. They have $96 million in cap space. That right there is huge, and they need a running back. They average just 4 yards per carry as a team. That is horrendous, and they don't have a single running back on that team that can really viably run and work in the passing game. And that's something that Mark Ingram is very underrated for, his ability to do both. And so I'd love to see what he could do there. Again, they can give him what he wants. They can give him lots of money. They can give him a starting role, and they can focus that offense on him and not just make him the running back, but make the offense built on that as they develop up Sam Darnold. But again, the biggest thing holding him back from leaving is that he clearly just wants to stay in New Orleans. So again, keeping that in mind, another team that he could go to is the Texans. Texans have $59 million in cap space, and unlike a lot of these teams, a lot of these other teams that have big cap spaces, they need to re-sign a lot of players. The Texans don't have to re-sign a ton of players. Most of their players are already on contracts, and so that helps them very well. They also need a lot of help at running back. They average just 4 yards per carry as a team. That right there hurts them as well. And their running backs combined for less than 400 receiving yards. All of their running backs combined for less than 400. That is awful. In most offenses and a lot of offense in the NFL nowadays, a single running back will have more than 400 receiving yards or even more than 500 oftentimes. And so it'd be really cool to see what Mark Ingram could come in and do and really change that offense and helping give Deshaun Watson an extra weapon out of the backfield. Something that they desperately needed. When we watched them in the playoffs versus the Colts, they looked flat. They didn't run that well, and then they struggled to pass. He's a guy who could come in and entirely change that offense and be the spark that they need. So that honestly is one of the things that I'm rooting for. Like, I really want him to go to the Texans. It's probably not the most realistic option, but I'd love to see that. And then finally, we talked about how bad the Bills are. The running backs are averaging just 3.25 yards per carry and only combined for 4 touchdowns this last season. They have $80 million in cap space. Absolutely, Mark Ingram is a guy who could go there. I don't think he wants to go there, but if he gets a big enough contract, that could certainly happen. But I've been talking on for a while, and Rob, I'm curious, what do you think about this whole he just wants to stay in the Saints thing?
Yeah, I think his one is going to be more productive there. When I talk about production, I'm talking about not total volume, but maybe yards per carry, things like that. But, I think some teams are going to throw some money at him. There's other factors too. Does he have family? Is he living? There's, other things that factor in why a guy may leave that team. I'd say at this point, I give him a 40% chance of staying there. Mm-hmm. I do have concern about him, though. Now, you talked about slight drop in production last year. That could be for a lot of reasons. If you look at his career, first couple years in the league, first 2-3 seasons, he wasn't that productive. Yards per carry wasn't very good. Then, boom, this guy takes off. He was great. And then last year gets busted for PEDs. Comes back last year, and we saw a decline statistically. How much were those numbers boosted by possibly PEDs? And could that factor in teams taking a look at him in the offseason? So that's the only thought that I had. I don't know if you want to add to that. But
no, I completely agree. I mean, that was a question that we had going into this season, and honestly, it felt pretty confirmed. Some of his production was due to the PEDs, was due to the drugs. And so going forward, as he's further removed from that and as he takes a bigger workload, we always talk about running back is the position in the NFL where you can only take so much workload. You can take every snap at quarterback position and be perfectly fine if you have a good offensive line. And running back is one where teams are going to have to genuinely look at him and say, can he take the full workload? And we'll see how that is. But honestly, I bet that there's a very good chance of all these teams we've talked about that he's going to take the pay cut and stay for the Saints. But there's also a very good chance, maybe 50-60% chance that he goes somewhere else.
All right. So talk about Kareem Hunt. He was released by Kansas City after a video of an altercation at a hotel there. Now I want to be careful when I say this. I'm not excusing his behavior, and this video is not a social commentary. We're simply discussing the likelihood that he's going to come back next year and play. And as of right now, many reports have come in that he will be back sooner than later and will probably be back for this next season. This is not the same situation as Ray Rice there, okay? Once again, I'm not trying to minimize what happened there. A couple things, though, I think that give teams incentive to want to bring Hunt back where they didn't Rice. One, the Ray Rice video was just absolutely brutal, what he did there. The other thing is Ray Rice was starting to have a decline statistically. Mm-hmm. And so he wasn't as productive. The incentive for teams willing to take that chance, a guy that maybe was on a decline, wasn't simply there. The risk reward wasn't there. Whereas Hunt is younger and this guy is young and very productive. The two assaults are different. In fact, the police that showed up on the scene there came on publicly and made a statement that Hunt or the woman involved in the video, that either one of them could have filed a report against either one. So they didn't see it necessarily like a lot of people as blatantly his fault, although they weren't advocating him of his responsibility in that there. Kareem Hunt is a versatile back. He runs hard. He's got good hands. He's just like Bell in the fact that he's a 3-down back. He can do it all there. In his brief 2-year career, he's had 25 TDs in 27 games. He's got a 4.7 yards per carry, 3.6 per game. That projects out to be 58 catches per season. As an NFL, as a rookie in the NFL, he led the NFL in rushing. That's just a phenomenal thing there. His 2 years in the league, he's averaged 4th and 8th as far as average points per game in the running back position. So this guy has been very productive there. You actually have some analytics that you studied with him going into this year. If you want to share any of those.
Yeah, absolutely. How could I not? I don't want to take too much time, so I'm just going to briefly mention 3 or 4 of them. But we talked about coming his rookie year, he had that big season, and then we looked into last year, and everyone thought that Alvin Kamara was the best rep back out of that draft class. And I remember we got so much hate. This was probably one of the least popular opinions we've ever put out here on our channel, and was our opinion that Kareem Hunt was the better running back than Alvin Kamara. And you know what? Honestly, I think that we were proven a little bit right. Now, some of the statistics, of course, this last year, you can just look at them, compare them 1-to-1. How do they do that? But going forward, all we had was their rookie season statistics. And at least as far as the rookie seasons go, we had a lot of good reasons to support that as we went forward at the time. And some of these were some really in-depth stats. Now, these stats are very hard to find. They're very time-consuming and very difficult. So there's a reason we don't use them on every player. But we did happen to find these for Kareem Hunt. First stat was hit-generated yards per carry. Now, that is a very complex stat that basically measures how well he's able to create yardage in the open field. This accounts for about 20% of your yards per carry. Of the rookie running back class that he came with, that rookie season, that first year for them, he was second with 6.87. He also had stuff-generated yards per carry. Now, this is very similar to that, but it's actually yards per carry created in tight, confined physical situations where there's not so much of an open field. This is also considered to generate about 20% or 1/5 of a player's yards per carry. He ranked 7th in that with 0.81. And then his success rate, this one as a whole, just measures how well he is able to hit a hole. So if an offensive line opens a hole, did he hit the hole or not, or did he miss it? That is 95.9%. That was first out of all the running backs in his draft class. And then all those numbers were put together to combine to compare them so we wouldn't have to look at them individually. This is called a running back composite score. And of all the running backs in that draft class, he was first with 0.48. Now, again, don't want to waste too much time on the numbers, but he came out and exploded, and we really had that discussion going into their sophomore seasons of who was the best. And, you know, I still feel that it's Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, you look at it, another thing you didn't include in there, he was near the top in the league, not just among rookies, but all running backs in terms of yards after contact, the ability to cause players to miss. You know, he was great in open field. He was really phenomenal early this year, but he panicked. First 2 games, his numbers weren't great. People were just trading him, panicking, but he hit his groove there, and he was great. This guy's very talented there. So, yeah, there's some great numbers. This guy's got all the talent. There's no issue with him there. Where is he going to land? I'd have to put my money in Chicago Bears at this point. One, of course, Coach Nagy has actually come out publicly, and here's what he said. While he worked with him, of course, Coach Nagy was the offensive coordinator of Kansas City the first year that he was there. Kareem Hunt was there. So there were no issues at all. Said that he was a really, really good kid. He came to work every day. He was not late to meetings. This is a learning lesson from him. He made a mistake. I think he understood that, and he's moved on. I think they're doing this to test the waters to see how the public opinion would be and whether or not they're going to bring this guy in. I think they're going to. They have a deficiency with their backs. Once again, Tariq Cohen, very good, but too small to be your every down back. Jordan Howard, big physical back, but is not good. Does not a good fit in Nagy's passing scheme there. It just doesn't fit well. But Kareem Hunt would fit very, very well in that offense there. And so I think that's what's going to happen there. With that said, there are some question marks. You know, and so for me, unlike Brown and Bell, I think that he definitely has got first-round fantasy talent, but probably projects at this point to be a second-round running back as far as where he's going to get drafted. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. You look back, 20 years ago, running backs were just handing the ball between the tackles and let them just hit guys, and that was really it. And then we started to develop, a bit more faster outside runners. We started to develop guys who can catch out of the backfield more, and that was really interesting. You saw for a period of time, we started to see running backs move in where you had your physical runner, but you also had your third down back. And we're starting to hit a period of time in the NFL where you can't do that anymore. You can't have your physical runner and then your receiving back, your third down back. Has to be the same guy. Yep. The running backs or the teams with the most effective running games, the most effective backfields are with that one guy who can do both. That's Todd Gurley, that's David Johnson, that's Kareem Hunt, that's Le'Veon Bell. And so that is absolutely huge of seeing that switch going forward.
Okay. I know you're excited to talk about this guy.
I'm very excited to talk about this guy. I can't believe there isn't more discussion about Jared Cook. Let's talk about his stats last year because I just want to hype everyone up. Can we just get excited as I am about this guy? Last year he had 101 targets, 68 catches, 896 yards, and 6 touchdowns on 13.2 yards per reception. Now, it's hard to measure how much stats are worth much. How much do you value yards? How much do you value touchdowns? But in my opinion, he was a top 5 tight end in the NFL last year. Statistically, that's what he was. And I think that's absolutely huge to remember because if a guy is a top 5 running back or a top 5 wide receiver, he's considered elite. I mean, let's talk about what are some of the, Rob, who would you say were maybe just roughly 5 of the best or, some of the best running backs last year? You would all consider them elite, would you not?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And we have an elite tight end right here in Jared Cook. Though he is old at 32 years old, we've seen a lot of tight ends have production at this age. It will drop off eventually, but for a year or two, he's got huge value for some teams. I think that he's an elite tight end, and I'm excited to see where he can go. So let's talk about some of those options. Now, I do want to say that he does have that range of being 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns and having a great season. But the tight end position is also dependent on where he goes. He could go somewhere and disappear. He could have 5 touchdowns, only 400 yards. So I want to say it very much depends on where he goes. But he has so much ceiling that you have to pay attention to this. And my first team is the Jets. I know I've talked a lot about the Jets in picking up players, and that's because they have so much cap space. Again, $96 million. But also, they came out recently, and you know what they said, which this is obvious. You expect it, but it is important that they did it. And they just said, first and foremost, right now, we want to continue to develop our quarterback, Sam. And that's what they said. They're going to develop Sam Darnold. And you know what? He doesn't have a lot of weapons there, especially if they lose Robby Anderson, who's a player I'll talk about later. They need to get someone in there that can help him out, and Jared Cook could absolutely be that guy. The biggest deterrent from this happening would be that he's 32 and maybe they don't want to sign an old player as they go forward because they're in that rebuilding mode and trying to develop who they are as a franchise. As well as Chris Herndon, we like him. He started to add a little bit of value. But when you look at his stats, it was all potential. There was nothing there that said he was a great tight end. It was all he could be good. And so that is something to note there. Another team is the Cowboys. I love and I admire and I respect what they did trading for Amari Cooper, and man, did it work. Without Cooper, they would not have made the playoffs. He made the difference for them. Of course, they didn't win the Super Bowl, but he definitely helped. Now they have $48 million in cap space, and they still need a guy to help them in that passing game. Despite trading for Cooper and Cooper being that huge boost, you know why they still struggled in the playoffs and why they didn't make it further? It was a passing game. Ezekiel Elliott played fine. The defense played fine. They just couldn't move the ball in the air. I mean, that was, in the end, that was the issue. And they need to bring in a guy. And, my first thought was they're going to bring in another wideout. But maybe they like Gallup and they develop Gallup. They need a tight end. Maybe they bring in Jared Cook. $48 million is a lot of money. I could absolutely see it spending on this guy for a year or two. Again, the big thing with the Jets not picking him was the age. For the Cowboys, that's not it because they just made the playoffs. They are a contender. Whether or not you like to admit it. And then the other one, maybe the Bengals might do this. They have $50 million in cap space. Their wide receivers are set with AJ Green and, I'm blanking. What's his name? Boyd. Tyler Boyd, thank you. And then they've got their running back set in Joe Mixon. CJ Uzuma he just wasn't good enough last year. They need a tight end. And they have said that they want to commit to Andy Dalton. And so maybe they say, we're going to focus on our defense this offseason, but we're going to do just one thing to help our quarterback. And maybe that one thing is going after Jared Cook. So I do like Jared Cook this year. I'm curious to see where he can go. And those are probably the 3 biggest options, either the Jets, the Cowboys, or the Bengals going forward.
Yeah, don't have a lot to say there. You're right. I mean, the numbers don't seem to be spectacular if you pull back, but if you think about the position and how thin it is, those are amazing numbers. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that would put him in the top 5 in scoring there. I will say this about Dallas. This is a team, you go back to Jason Witten, they love tight ends. They love to use their tight ends, and they've been looking for a tight end. In fact, there's always speculation that one of the reasons why the Eagles drafted Dallas Goedert was to keep Dallas from getting a tight end after the Jason Witten had retired, and they knew that they would need that. So, yeah, I could see him definitely landing there. I think that'd be a good fit, not only for him, but for the team. I guess it's going to come down to how much money they want to spend and is he willing to go there. But, yeah, I like that. So.
Yeah, I suppose it bodes well for them that Cook is a little bit under the radar right now. Maybe they won't have to pay too much.
Talk about Tevin Coleman there. Now, he's come out publicly and said he wants to stay with Atlanta. Of course, everybody says that when you're still playing for the team. I think this is a guy, because I think most guys in the NFL are pretty competitive, want to become the number one guy and get a majority of the carries. But if he stays with Atlanta, the better running back skill-wise is going to be Freeman. And so Freeman's going to be the 1A back. He can be maybe 1B, but he's definitely not going to be the go-to guy there. And I also think he's going to get a lot of cash thrown at him. People are willing to take a shot at him. And so I think that he's going to take a look at some other team. He's got a 4.4 career yards per carry, and he's got 28 touchdowns in the last 44 games, which is pretty good. But it's even better if you consider the fact that he was a backup oftentimes. So, if he wasn't, he's probably looking at about 35, 36 touchdowns on 44 games. That is very good there. In a few starts when Freeman's been out, he's shined. He's looking that he can act times. Now, he's disappeared at times in games and stretches where he's not had good games, but he's also had some very good all-purpose games there. What do I expect from this guy? I don't see him staying with Atlanta. I'd be surprised. Maybe they'll bring him back, but probably not. I think wherever he lands for me, I look at Coleman, I see him as a running back 2 or 3. And once again, it's sorry because we're speculating where he's going to go at this point. But I think if he gets signed somewhere else, people might overreact, get excited, don't know what's he going to do. But for me, I'm a little more hesitant there. Once again, in a limited role, at times he's filled and he's looked good, but he has disappeared there. Teams are always struggling to find running back, especially in fantasy football. You can never have enough on your bench. And so I don't think that he's going to be a running back 1 or 2 that I would trust, but he's definitely a guy that would be a running back 3, and definitely a guy you need to have on your bench. You need to keep a guy on the offseason. So I think Tevin Coleman is a guy that can go out there and he can be productive. He is not going to be what I would call a running back 1 or 2 you'll see in our preseason rankings next year at this point. So anything you want to add? Any thoughts on Tevin Coleman there?
No, that is the thing. It is weird. It's so hard to measure guys' talent when he's been a backup his whole career and he hasn't seen any other teams. It's just dependent on where he goes and the system fit and the offensive line. But that will be exciting, something to monitor as we go forward this offseason. All right, what about Randall Cobb? I believe this is the first wide receiver I've had an opportunity to talk about, and this is interesting. So first we got to talk about some of the negatives. He's 29 years old. That's not old, but that's not young. He struggled this last season. He was good. He was really good for quite a while there in Green Bay, and then this last year things kind of seemed to fall apart. And even Aaron Rodgers had quite a few criticisms about him, which is far from good news. However, he is far too talented not to land somewhere where they're going to give him money, and he's going to have an opportunity to step up and be a good wide receiver. So where are some of the teams that he could land? First team I'm thinking of is the Tennessee Titans. They have $37 million in cap space. That's not a lot, but that is enough to go out and get this sort of guy. And they absolutely need it. They have their running backs set, at least from the production they were having at the end of the season. Their defense is phenomenal, very underrated. They've got special teams core. Like, they have everything set. They need to boost their passing game. You know how bad their passing game was? Their top 3 receivers combined for just 6 touchdowns. Most teams in the NFL, if their top 1 receiver had 6 touchdowns, would say that was a little low. In fact, Marcus Mariota, it's amazing they almost made playoffs. He only threw for 11 touchdowns all season. I mean, that is like classic 1960s football right there. It's just, I was shocked to be honest to find that, and yet he had a passer rating of 92. That is really, really high for a guy that only threw 11 touchdowns, and I think that's partly because they want to hold him back. They play that defense and they run the ball, but also they just didn't have the weapons. And I think they were a smart enough team to say, we're just not going to throw the ball until we have those guys. Maybe they bring in Randall Cobb, and Randall Cobb becomes that guy to help boost that offense. He certainly is a fast wide receiver who can make some big plays. Another place that you could go are the Browns. Talk about a lot of money. The Browns have $75 million in cap space. They've come out and said, the coaches and the team and the entire staff there have said the top priority is developing Baker Mayfield. And Baker Mayfield, of course, you're going to develop him. He set a rookie record 27 touchdown passes in just 13 starts, and that was despite having not a great receiving core. I mean, Jarvis Landry was his best guy, but he didn't even break 1,000 yards receiving, and he was really inconsistent. They need a wide receiver, too, there to help out, and maybe Randall Cobb comes in, and he's that guy. And then finally, a place that's known for picking up slightly old wide receivers, maybe the Baltimore Ravens. They have $31 million in cap space. That's not huge, but wide receiver is what they need to fill. Mark Andrews started to really click there at tight end, and I think they're going to roll with him. Their running back situation, they've got a lot of different options to work with. Dixon looks like maybe they could roll with him. He looks like he could be a good option next year. They've got a very good defense. I mean, really the question is, how can they grow Lamar Jackson? How can they get Jackson to be a more traditional and effective NFL quarterback? And maybe getting him a good wideout like Randall Cobb is just the solution. He's not the most exciting wide receiver out there, but after Antonio Brown is gone and after some other guys are gone, Randall Cobb could be a good fit for some teams.
All right. Talk about C.J. Anderson. So C.J. Anderson, 5'8", 225. He runs really hard. He's physical and he's got decent hands. And a career yards per carry of 4.5. So this guy has been productive. In 2017, he had a 1,000-yard rushing season in a below-average offense in Denver. It would appear this guy could be a solid back, but you started to have to wonder, is this a guy that could be a legitimate running back 1 or 2 option there? And the reason why you started to question that is really unwillingness of Denver to commit to him. From the outside looking, it looked like there was limitations that he would simply just be a backup in the league. So Denver didn't have a lot of options at running back. They hadn't drafted Lindsey yet and some other guys there. And after coming off a 1,000-yard season, they let him go. That was confusing, at least for me outside looking in. Okay, like you think you'd bring him back. They let him go even though they didn't have a lot of options yet. He didn't really land anywhere. He ends up eventually with the Panthers. They release him. Goes to the Raiders. They release him. So it begins to reaffirm, okay, maybe the Broncos saw something nobody else saw. Maybe they know some things that we don't. And release him is the right thing to do. But the Rams bring him on because Todd Gurley has some injuries. They need some depth there, so they bring him in as a backup and a stopgap to really rest Gurley heading into the playoffs. He was forced into action, and the guy has been phenomenal. He's had 4 touchdowns since then. Listen to this. He's had games of 20 carries, 167 yards. 23 carries, 132 yards. 23 carries again, 123 yards. And he had 16 for 44 in the playoffs. If you look at those games, 3 of those 4 games were against defenses that are very good against the run. And he has crushed it during that stretch with a 5.68 yards per carry. So this is not just a volume play. This guy's been productive. In fact, he's been more productive than Todd Gurley and used more than him in the playoffs versus the Saints and the Cowboys. Now, C.J. Anderson is going to be 28 next year. And in running back terms, 28 is not young. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I will say this, though. If you look at Priest Holmes, if you ever heard about Priest Holmes, take a look at his stat line. Look at his career. This guy was phenomenal. But his career did not take off till the age of 28 when he had a change of scenery and went from Baltimore to Kansas City there. At age of 28, he went on to have 3 consecutive Pro Bowls. Twice he had the most fantasy points per game or per season, led all fantasy players. And then a stretch between 95 to 2005. If you look at all the running backs and the average points per game, you look at the huge list, right? He was in the top 6 3 times, 2nd, 4th, and 6th, with only LaDainian Thompson and Marshall Faulk ahead of him. And so you look at a guy like Anderson at 28 in the right situation, what he's done, I think he could be productive. I think he had a hard time this offseason finding a team to go to. I think after this little stretch, he's not going to. I think a team's going to be willing to take a shot on this guy, give him some money, and bring him in. It's a bit premature because we need to see where he goes, but I would say this. If I look at the fantasy world, seeing how people are, how they react, I anticipate that most people are going to draft him as a mid to high-end running back too going into next season, so that's where I would assess him. So. There.
No? All right, let's talk about Latavius Murray. And when I first started to do this research on Latavius Murray, I honestly thought that there was a chance that he would just come back to Minnesota. A lot of times, and I've talked about with his other players and just said, what are the odds that he just goes back to the team that he was just released from, that they throw him some money, right, because there aren't any fits anywhere else? That's not going to happen. He came out and he said, I want to play, I want to start, I'm not content being a backup. He even kind of called out Dalvin Cook. He even said, Dalvin knows I like to compete and I want to show him I'm better than him. Or he's a very competitive guy apparently, and so I think it's very evident that he's going to go somewhere else. The Vikings are committed to Cook being their guy as long as he can be healthy. And so questions we have to ask are, how good is he? Where can he go? And how good can he be where that is? And I think he can be a phenomenal north-south runner. Again, you have to, as a fantasy football player, you have to understand football as a whole and understand styles and schemes and understand that that's the way he's going to play as that between the tackles guy. And it's been effective for him. In the 2016 and 2017 seasons combined, he had 20 rushing touchdowns. That's less than only Ezekiel Elliott. Second best in the NFL for rushing touchdowns in that 2-year span. He had some phenomenal years. 28, he's a little bit old, but he's still got a little bit time under his belt where he can be productive. And so, yeah, he's absolutely worth it. And then the one thing that bodes well for him is that some of these teams that we're going to talk about don't have huge salary caps to go after these guys. We're going to talk about the Eagles for sure as a first team. This is maybe the most loaded class of free agent running backs ever. Le'Veon Bell, Mark Ingram, Kareem Hunt. Now you're talking about Latavius Murray, Peterson's out there. There are so many guys who are able to do some things at the running back position. So this is exciting to say that he could probably go for very cheap because of all those other options, you know? And so again, first one is the Eagles. Now they do have the smallest salary cap in the NFL, and that's why I just brought up all the other talents, is because if the Eagles are going to sign him, it absolutely needs to be on the cheap. Very, very cheap. It needs to happen. But it could happen. They're trying to replace Ajayi as their north-south between the tackles runner, and I've used that phrase a lot of times. For one, we have seen with Blount and Ajayi, like that's the sort of runners that the Eagles like to have. That's just the way that they've always been, and that's the way Murray is, so he's an awesome scheme fit. Another one is the Jaguars. If Fournette leaves, he could go there. Them getting rid of Leonard Fournette would free up some salary, which would have to happen because they have the second smallest salary cap in the NFL. But again, if Fournette left, they would have a hole at running back, but they'd have some money to work with. That could also happen. Then finally, in the off chance, which I think this is going to happen, but in the off chance Kareem Hunt doesn't go and play for the Chicago Bears, he could go play for Chicago. They have $14 million in cap. They already have Tariq Cohen, their receiving back, and maybe he just comes in and replaces Jordan Howard this season as that physical runner. And so not a whole lot to say there about Latavius Murray. I think he has low-end potential. I don't think he's going to be a high-end fantasy starting running back. But again, we'll see where he goes and how that develops.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that he's got some potential, but no, I don't think he's a guy that I would consider a strong fantasy option. So let's talk about Dez Bryant. So last year, Dallas didn't want to bring him back, so they let go of him. He held out, eventually signs with the Saints, then immediately tears his Achilles heel. Now, if you take a look at recovery from that injury, it's actually slower and more difficult than recovery from like ACL. If you look at a lot of players, a prime example is Donte Foreman and others. And so it's very, very unlikely that he's going to be ready for the start of next season. Okay, if you look at doctors, if you study the injuries, if you look at other players that have had this, the recovery is much slower. And then get back to 100%, it's going to take a while. He's going to have to get back from the injury. He's going to have to sign with a new team, learn the playbook, get his timing down with a new quarterback, break off rust. I think he has very little fantasy value next season at all. That's my take on him. I think it also should be concerning for us that heading into 2018, he had a really hard time catching out with teams. People were just not interested in this guy, at least not the money he was asking for. Dallas let go of him even though they didn't have a legitimate wide receiver one. In fact, if we're honest, they didn't have a legitimate wide receiver two on that team. And they let go of him. That should be another red flag for us. So don't get caught up his name and his past. Obviously, he had a stretch of like 3 years there where he was phenomenal. He's not that player right now. If you look at it, his skills and stats have declined. You have to go all the way back to 2014 to find a good fantasy season. With that said, he does have talent. He does have skills. And at the age of 30 as a wide receiver, he has some years ahead of him. But his fantasy impact is not going to be felt until 2020. So don't be a guy that gets excited next year. Once again, I think that he'll still have some good years. I think he can rebound. I think 2020 he can be good. But next year, I would stay away from this guy if I was you. Any take on that?
No, that's perfectly accurate. We have to talk about him because he's a big name, but does anyone really expect him to have a big role and be an awesome fantasy option? No. You can take a late round pick on him and you can take a chance if you want, but you just shouldn't have to pay that much for him.
Yeah, I'd probably watch and wait, honestly, because some other owners are going to get excited and hyped and probably take him too early. So.
Oh, for sure. All right, what about running back Adrian Peterson? Adrian Peterson actually had a pretty good year last year. I was surprised to see some of his stats. If you want to know about kind of the year he had, look it up. I don't want to waste a lot of time talking about his statistics, but he did surprise us despite missing some time, coming to the Redskins, not being the set running back at first. The entire offensive line, the quarterback, that whole team, that offense fell apart, and yet he was still productive despite facing loaded boxes. He's 34 years old. Of course, that's a concern. Now, I didn't want to bring up this team as a place he could go again, but I think it could happen. What about the Jets? We've talked about a lot of options for the Jets and a lot of different players that they could pick up, but maybe they spend a lot of money on defense and at wideout and some other positions and then say, well, we just can't afford to spend that much at running back, and so maybe they go after Adrian Peterson. We talked about the money. Here's the thing. With $96 million in cap, they have enough money, even if they don't have as much, they have enough money to give Peterson money that he wants if they don't get another one of those big name guys. And we've talked about their need, team yards per carry of 4.0. They need it. What I really like about this fit, and this is unfortunate for Jets fans, is your coach, Adam Gase. Last year, he loved Frank Gore. He brought in this old guy and gave him tons of carries for no reason. So what's to say he won't do that with Adrian Peterson? I don't know what you think about that, but that feels like a very genuine possibility.
It could be. You know, the one thing I'll say about Adrian Peterson, you know, being Vikings fans, having him for many years, the one thing you know about this guy's money's not an issue for him. He wants to go where he's going to play and he's going to start and he's going to get carries. I think at the end of his career, that is by far the most important thing. I think a team can get a real good deal on this guy, probably more than any other running backs where they can maybe get a deal from him.
Absolutely, and that was the final thing. They can promise him a large role in that offense. And then finally, I want to move on to the only other team that I felt was particularly worth mentioning, because there are plenty of teams he could go to, but I wanted to only discuss teams where he might go and be the guy. Because it's like, oh, he could go to the Dallas Cowboys and play on the bench. Like, no one wants to hear about that. So what about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
Oh, that's a good play.
I'm so happy that you mentioned that he would be willing to just take a pay cut, because they only have $7 million in cap space, and they do have a lot of things that they need to fill, but they have no needs on that passing game. With Mike Evans, Cameron Bate, O.J. Howard, Godwin, of course Vincent Jackson might go, and some things, but they have Deshaun Jackson, Vincent Jackson, it's messed up. But anyways, they have no need in that passing game. If they're going to make any additions to that offense, it will be the running game, which averaged just 3.7 yards per carry. I think if a team was going to come in and move in and take advantage on a player who's willing to go for cheap, and just because the team is just willing to say, hey, Adrian, here's the offense, you're our guy, I think the Bucs are going to do that. This is honestly maybe one of the most confident projections or ideas or things that I've looked forward to this offseason.
Yeah, I think that's a great play. I think you're absolutely right. I think you nailed it. I think it definitely could end up there and be productive. So, talk about Mike Davis, running back of Seattle there. I look at last season with Seattle. Now, this guy has improved his yards per carry every season been in the NFL. First year, he had 1.7 yards per carry. He went up to 2.6, 3.5, and then last year, a career best 4.6 yards per carry. So was this simply a byproduct of Seattle improved running game and making a concerted effort to run? I mean, they often had 6 offensive linemen in there, and so they really made an effort to run that ball. Well, I think some of it is that, but we also saw some of this improvement happen going back to 2017. We saw glimpses of that. During 4 games in 2017 when he had double-digit carries, during those games his yards per carry was 4.34, and so he was good. He's still young at 26. That's at least what his age will be next year. He's 5'9", 220, so he's physical back. He can play hard. When I look at him, though, because his sample size is not a lot, because he's had really one season that he's been good, but in a backup role, I don't think teams are going to bring him in to be a number 1 back. I think he's going to be brought in as a role player or to be a part of a running back buy committee. That's what I guess his role is going to be next season. I'm less confident of all the other backs we talked about in terms of being a starting back. Could he be great? Sure. There's always a situation where he could get into the right situation, through the right break, injury, suspension, things like that. He certainly could do that. But for me right now, he lands as a running back 4 in terms of fantasy production. So,
all right. All right, what about Robby Anderson? He has huge upside. We've talked about him in the past. I'm not going to waste any time talking about his previous statistics. Guys, you're smart enough to go on ESPN and check out his game log and his yearly stats. This is the time to project where he could go. And we've already talked about the Browns, but they need a wide receiver. $75 million in cap space. They could throw a lot of money at this guy, and he could be the difference maker in that offense in helping give an extra weapon to Baker Mayfield. But that's all I have to say on that, because we've already spoken on this. What about the New England Patriots? The Patriots have $20 million in cap space, and I think he is a beautiful fit for that offense. Let's look at the wide receivers, or the receivers that they have as options in that offense. The player with the most receiving touchdowns and receptions for them was actually a running back. That right there, it doesn't bode well for them. Then they had Julian Edelman, 850 yards and 6 touchdowns. Of course, that's okay. That's like a below average, mediocre sort of, just as your number 1 wideout, that you need some other guy there. Then they had Rob Gronkowski, who was pretty good tight end, very talented, but with the injuries, his problems is he's aging and he's really struggling more and more every year. You can't rely on him. And then, of course, Josh Gordon was probably their 2nd best wide receiver, and he's gone now. They need another wideout to help out that offense. Again, when your running back is your best receiver, and then a banged up tight end and a safe but honestly quite mediocre receiver in Edelman, you need another guy in there. And specifically, you need a deep ball threat. You need a playmaker. That could be Robby Anderson to fit into that role. That, again, is kind of open right now because Gordon's gone and because you can't trust Gronkowski. And I think that that's definitely a move that they should make going forward. When you look at Tom Brady's aging, this isn't, he's not 35 anymore. That sounds so young for Brady, but for other guys, that sounds old. Where before I would have trusted him to work with anything he was given. He's getting older. I think the Patriots would be stupid to not give him weapons to work with. What do you think about that? You got the Patriots jersey on, so you have to give some input.
Yeah, we got a Patriots hat on, so I mean, we're Vikings fans, but that's
we look
another
a little
conversation.
biased
Yeah, we
right
do.
now.
So, anyways, I think he'd be a great fit. You're right. Josh Gordon was there to really stretch defenses, to go deep, be a deep threat there. He's gone. They need that. Robby Anderson is a great deep threat, and he's a perfect complement to Julian Edelman, who is a possession receiver, slot receiver there. And so I think you're right. He would thrive in that offense. I think they'd be wise to bring him in. Although I do think this, I think he's going to probably stay with the Jets. And here's why. He developed chemistry with Sam Darnold late in the year, and they need some weapons for their young quarterback. And so I think they're going to try to throw a lot of money his way to bring him back. But I don't know. I guess we'll see. But I would agree with you. I mean, that would there wouldn't be a better fit for him, and there would be a better fit for the Patriots to bring him in there. So we'll see. I guess it comes down to what money he's willing to take. The one thing I know about New England is they're going to bring in guys, even projects, even wide receivers that have issues, but they're not willing to throw a lot of money at any one player, unless your name is Tom Brady. Beyond that, they are really frugal. So I guess we'll wait and see.
Exactly. They certainly can't compete as far as payment goes with $20 million compared to that $96 million.
So we'll see. So I want to talk about Ajayi. Tore his ACL last year, but he's going to be 26, and this guy's had success in the NFL there. Before he tore his ACL last year, he had 3 TDs in 3 games, looked pretty good. Going into last year, really big on him. If you watch our videos, we thought he was going to be huge there. Obviously, you can't predict a torn ACL there. Now, if you look in 2017, after being traded to Philadelphia, he really thrived. But even before that trade in Miami, he had 2 100-yard games, and he looked okay at times in a very bad Miami offense that struggled with Jay Cutler, a quarterback who's now retired. Gets traded, his yards per carry jumped from 3.4 to 5.8 with the Eagles. Now, his overall numbers with Philadelphia weren't great. There's a few reasons for that there. One, they didn't need him to. They had other backs there. Reports where he had a hard time understanding pass protection, learned the playbook, so they slowly moved him in that role there. But then eventually the carries picked up there, and the guy started to be productive, especially going into the postseason. He was very huge in the playoffs. But this is a guy back in 2016, had 3 games in one season over 200 yards. The only guys that ever done that was Tiki Barber, Cameron, O.J. Simpson. I mean, that's great company to be in there. And so this guy's proven that he could be good. Okay, if you look at from his rookie season in 2018, his 2.4 yards after contact was best among all running backs with 500-plus carries. So this is a guy that, even if you look at analytics, sabermetrics, whatever you call it, this is a guy that's proven he can be very productive there. So he's got a resume I think a lot of teams will covet, but I think he's a guy that you could get cheap. He's coming off of ACL surgery there. He's got a good combination of speed and power. And so when I take a look at his skill set, I think he's a guy that's got a resume. I think a guy's productive. I think a guy that, had he not got hurt last year, would have had a big year with Philadelphia, and I think he can do that. But there are concerns. It's not just that he tore his ACL. Actually heading into that year, and if you look back when he was in college, this guy had a history of knee injuries. And so when I look at him, I think he's a guy who's got a very high ceiling but carries a very low floor. He could be a huge, huge bargain at the right price. At this point, where he's going to land, I don't know. I think if Philadelphia can't make some aggressive moves, I think they'll throw some cash his way. There's been conversations out of Philadelphia that they're going to try to go another route, but ultimately they could fall back and offer him a low-ball deal because of the knee injuries, and maybe he would just stay there because he knows the offense and he's got nowhere else to turn. So there hasn't been a lot of conversation out there right now as far as rumors where he's going to go, simply because he's still recovering from that injury, and he'll have to prove it to some teams first before they're willing to sign him. But any takes on him?
No, I completely agree. That is one of those things. That injury and all the other talent at running back this year, it's really going to lower his stock. But if he lands in the right spot and gets the right opportunity, he's one of those players, as we talk about in fantasy, never has that high draft value, but is always worth a spot on your bench, because if he gets the opportunity, he will take advantage of that. All right, what about Doug Martin? I didn't want to talk about Doug Martin. I'm not excited about him, and I'll talk about that. But a lot of people ask me, and specifically, I can't remember who it was, but a friend of mine said, what do you think about Doug Martin? I think he could go somewhere and have a good year. Well, I want to talk about that because I don't think that's going to happen. He finished the last 2 games of the year very strong. He played a very good Denver defense and had 21 carries for 107 yards and a touchdown. By the way, to note, that's 5.1 yards per carry. And then the last season he played in Kansas, or the last week of the season, he played in Kansas City, and he had 100 yards on 4.8 yards per carry. Despite losing 35-3, he was still able to get those carries and have those yards, and so he finished the season strong. And I think some people are wondering, could he go somewhere and be productive? But as you look into the numbers, you remember he only had 4.2 yards per carry, which is brutal, and 4 touchdowns all year. On top of that, only 18 receptions the entire season. And then you look at the fact that as the Raiders have no options at running back this year as they look going forward. It's not a bright situation there in that backfield, and they're not bringing him back. In fact, Raiders coach John Gruden said specifically that he wants to bring Marshawn Lynch back for next year, but that he doesn't want to bring Doug Martin back. And I think that that's really bad news.
Powerful statement, yeah.
And so some teams he could go to, honestly, I'm expecting him to go as a backup. Maybe he goes to like the Browns or the Jets or the Bills. Honestly, I could see him going to a team like the Lions, who don't have a lot of cap space but are looking for that guy to be the backup to Kerryon Johnson. That's what I'm expecting. But I did just want to hit on the fact and make that point. He doesn't have a lot of fantasy value at 30 years old, and just kind of the way he's been performing. So, again, that's not exciting, but as we go into free agency, people were asking about it, and so we're answering.
Okay. Adam Humphries. I actually like this kid. I think he's got a lot of potential. 2018 and 16 games, he had 76 catches, over 100 on 105 targets. He ended up with 816 yards and 5 TDs. He had a good catch rate percentage of 72.4, and yards per reception at 10.7, yards per target at 7.77. I could give you all the numbers, but he had a really solid year. He really did. He's only going to be 26 at the start of next year, so he's still young, especially in wide receiver terms. That's really young. He was 18th among wide receivers in both receptions and first downs last year. He had 49 first downs on his catches. He's been great, solid receiver as yards after the catch. In fact, he ranked second among wide receivers in yards after the catch in 2016, and last year he was top 25. Now, what could this guy do? I think he's got some potential there. He's a guy that didn't come out of college necessarily considered a great wide receiver, but yet I think he's done a great job in the league. He could regress like a Cole Beasley or Danny Amendola. But he also has a skill set in the ceiling where this guy could become the next Danny Edelman or Golden Tate, who are mainstay studs, who are mainstay studs in PPR leagues. Now, if you take a look at Tate, Golden Tate, it wasn't until he was 26 that he had 1,000 yards receiving season. Edelman took him until his age 27 to do it, and Chris Carter didn't do it until he was 28, until those wide receivers finally had 1,000 yards in a season there. So if you look at Adam Humphries, you look at what he's done, he's been productive, he looks good. If he lands in a high-volume offense, or if he stays in Tampa Bay, which I am suspecting that he probably will, I think that this is a guy that would have higher value in PPR leagues, and next season could end up being a wide receiver 2/3 in PPR leagues. Of course, he'd be lower in standards, but I actually like this guy. He's not going to be great. He doesn't have a high ceiling like some of those top 10 wide receivers, but he's one of those guys that's not sexy, not exciting, but you put on your bench, ends up being your wide receiver 3, and his production is just enough to push you over the edge and move you from being a good fantasy team to a great fantasy team. So
absolutely, he's kind of like the young man's Golden Tate. That's really the kind of wide receiver that he is. I wonder what his ceiling is if he continues to have that sort of role where there's got to be some sort of ceiling. But he's so young that you can't project that. You just got to put him on your bench and wait and see. And he's not a high player with this huge value. You're not gonna have to draft him super early in your fantasy leagues. So that's not a concern. He's absolutely worth the shot. I'm excited to see what he can do going forward.
A team that could probably use him, although I suppose Marvin Jones back and Kenny Golladay, but they miss Golden Tate. Could he end up in a team like Detroit? Once again, they don't have a lot of money, but here's my take.
And maybe this is good timing. It's just kind of weird how this happened. Let's talk about Golden Tate now. So here we are. Golden Tate, 31 years old, not really great as far as that age goes, but he does, as we've talked about, he is a good reception guy. He's not going to get you a ton of yards or touchdowns, but he's a PPR stud, and he's got some value to add to some teams. He absolutely still has the capability to help out some offenses. And some offenses I like are the 49ers. They have $49 million in cap space, can absolutely afford to add this guy. And if they don't get a guy like Antonio Brown or a Robby Anderson, they would love this guy. They've got Dante Pettis, who's a big playmaker. George Kittle's a huge playmaker and their primary guy. Maybe they say we just want one more guy. Maybe they say maybe we just want a safety blanket. We just need a little bit to go put us over the edge, and Golden Tate might be that option. Another possible place is the Colts. We talked about this. You asked me earlier, you were surprised that I was impressed, or you were surprised that I knew it. The Colts have the most salary cap in the NFL, $115 million. And when you really think about it, who's their number 1 or number 2 wideout behind T.Y. Hilton? I just can't think of a really great option.
Chester Rogers, Dontel Inman, they're all journeymen.
They absolutely need a wide receiver too, and a safe player that they can trust and that Andrew Luck can feel safe throwing the ball to. and they've got more than enough money for it, I mean, that's a really one of those why not sort of situations. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened this offseason. And then finally, we've talked about the Cowboys before, but again, maybe the Cowboys say we'd like just one more wideout to help us out, especially if they don't get another guy. I don't see them going after 2 receivers or 2 guys in that passing game this offseason, but they certainly will go for one. So if they don't get another, Golden Tate might be the guy.
Right. Donte Mocrief. So this guy showed promise when he was in Indianapolis there. He had 13 touchdowns between 2015 and 16, which is his second, third year in the league. He had good size, looked like this could be somebody there, but he just simply could not stay healthy for any stretch of time to do anything. Last season for the Jaguars, he became the Jags' best wide receiver for a stretch of play, but could not maintain that production or sustain that role. I think most likely due to the fact the quarterback play in Jacksonville was brutal there. I look ahead to next year and being, he to me projects as a wide receiver 3 at best in fantasy. Now he's a good size, 6'2", 220, but he really needs to be in a high volume offense to be of anything a real fantasy value there. And I think that's even a stretch to call him a wide receiver 3. I think right now he's a wide receiver 4. But he does have a talent. He could land on a team, and who knows, in the right offense, the right injuries, the right quarterback, he could be a nice sleeper there. So we'll see where he lands there. Been a long video. We're at an hour and 15 minutes. I could go deeper on some of his last plays. I don't want to. Before we wrap this up, I want to say this. We want to hear who you're excited about heading into free agency. Some of the guys we talked about, we want to know where you think they're going to land. And then we also want to hear other things like, what do you want to see in our videos? How can we make changes? We're in the offseason. We're making a lot of changes. We're excited for next year to improve our product. We've come a long way, but we have a long way to go, and we want to compete with the best out there in terms of giving you production, helping you guys be productive there. Before we stop, anything you want to add?
No, I really don't. This was actually probably the funnest video that I have done in a very long time. I love being kind of weird and just projecting and guessing and having fun. And sometimes we don't get to do that on this channel, so I really appreciated this. If you're still watching, let us know if you enjoyed this style of video, because I'd love to do some more of these. But guys, as always, we got to say thank you so much for watching. You have a great day, and God bless.